Hey guys, welcome to another week of Child Development 39. In this week's PowerPoint, we're going to look at Vygotsky, Lev Vygotsky, and Jean Piaget. They are both cognitive theorists. However, you will typically hear Vygotsky's theory referred to as a socio-cultural theory. And we'll talk about the reasons for that in just a couple of minutes. But they did both study cognitive development of children and individuals, and so we can attribute both of their work to the field of what we know about cognition and thinking and the brain and how that develops. So we'll make some comparisons at the end between the two of them, but as we go through, I think they should probably stand out pretty well, and you should be able to identify kind of what the differences between their two theories are. So we'll start with our objectives for the class this week. Describe Lev Vygotsky's theory of social cultural development will be the first one. Describe Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development will be the second one. And then compare and relate the two theories. And so I'm going to go through that just briefly in the PowerPoint today. Of course, as always, you guys will have much more work in the module as it relates to these ideas and topics, but I'm going to go over them just in brief so that you have the information and can hopefully apply it to the further work that you'll be doing this week. So let's start with Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian psychologist, was not actually influential in the United States until the 80s, so actually relatively recently. His work was kind of discovered and brought over to the United States in the 60s, but really he didn't become influential. We didn't start really applying his theory or talking about it much. You didn't start seeing it in textbooks, etc., until the 80s or later. So he studied cognitive development through the lens of cultural interactions. And so his theory, as I mentioned before, is identified as a socio-cultural theory. And that word is a fancy word that basically means exactly what it sounds. It's the interaction between social and cultural factors and how they contribute to cognitive development. So he looked at brain development through the lens of social and cultural factors. So what was happening around the child that contributed to their cognitive development, what was happening in that child's culture specifically. So Vygotsky has a lot of really interesting research about different cultures and why children of certain cultures developed different at different paces and rates and different skills. One really great example of that is that children in certain cultures know directional words and placement words better than other cultures. And so one example of this is the children of Varanasi, and that is a city in which the children know terms like northeast, northwest, southwest, etc. And so research has shown and studies have found that that's just common language and practice in that culture. So they might say, can you go pick up your backpack on the northeast side of the closet, or the northwest corner of the house, or south of the bookshelf, or whatever. And so as they're actually absorbed in that culture and in that language and hearing those words, they get accustomed to it and develop their own ability to use them. Whereas children in the United States obviously would never be able to do that unless guided, because it's not language that's typical of us here in the United States. So this is just one example of the many, many ways that culture kind of influences how children develop, but it's a pretty neat example. So if you research it or Google search it, you'll find more information about that and can kind of look into it further. So this is probably the most important. If I could have you walk away with one thing from this week's information, it would be the idea of the zone of proximal development. And so this picture here is a photo of the zone of proximal development, kind of a visual representation of it. This is probably the most important core concept from Vygotsky's work, and this is what he's extremely well known for. So basically, Vygotsky believed that cognition or cognitive development happens only within the zone of proximal development, meaning there's only so much a child can do. And so there's a specific skill level that a child is capable of depending on their age and their abilities. And they can't really perform outside of that area. With support, he believed that they can perform at a higher level, but still only to an extent, right? A 4-year-old is only going to be able to do so much, even with help. There's just certain things they won't be able to do yet because of their age and their ability to understand. So this is a pretty core concept of his theory. The zone of proximal development would be here in the middle circle. The inner circle is the dark blue, is what children can do independently. So this is something they can do on their own. No help. They don't need any support to do it. They're able to do it just independently. the zone of proximal development is here just outside that inner circle. So they can do some additional tasks if they're guided or if offered support, but maybe not fully independently yet. And then here, the most outer circle, the outermost circle is something that they can't do even with guidance, right? So a 6-year-old child not going to be able to drive a car, right? Their legs can't reach the pedals. I mean, they just absolutely cannot do it no matter how smart they are. But they could probably learn how to tie their shoes, right? Because if I can help them, guide them through it, walk them through it, show them step by step, then most likely they would be able to do that with a pretty good success rate. Okay, so as teachers or just individuals working with children in general, we always want to focus on this zone of proximal development. We don't ever want to offer a task that's too hard for a child because that'll frustrate them. But we also don't want to add something that's too easy because they'll be bored and they may not be driven to attempt that task. And so boredom can create some behavior problems and other things in early childhood programs. So just know zone of proximal development is Vygotsky's term. It's attributed solely to him. A very interesting kind of part about his theory and something definitely to remember. Scaffolding is another important word for Vygotsky's theory. He believed that children learn through guided participation with a teacher or capable peer, someone who's more highly skilled than they are. So kind of all of these words in this first sentence and this bullet point here are pretty important. Scaffolding is one of them. Guided participation is another one. That's the process of actually offering that scaffolding support to the child. Skilled learner or mentor or capable peer. You'll hear all of those different terms as it relates to Vygotsky's theory. And those are simply just the terms that define the idea of children need help from someone who's more capable. It could be someone their age, someone a little bit older, definitely from an adult. Okay, and so Vygotsky believed children have two sets of abilities. So kind of going back to this idea of the zone of proximal development, there are things that will develop naturally just because they're able to do them. So eventually they'll be able to walk, right? With or without help. A child should be driven and motivated to learn how to walk, and it's probably something that they'll do. But there could be additional things, potentials that they can possibly reach with guidance and support from others. Okay, so the idea of scaffolding is just the kind of scaffolding that you see on a building, right? It's a temporary support. It's the very same idea when we look at Vygotsky's theory. Scaffolding is a temporary support that we offer to help the child to accomplish a task. It could be brushing their teeth, right? So when a child's just learning how to brush their teeth, we might offer some scaffolding. Maybe we watch them to make sure that they're getting all the teeth, or point and say, don't forget that side back there, or get under here, or move your toothbrush around to all the spots, right? And so that's scaffolding. I'm not going to have to do that forever. At some point, I'll be able to fade that prompt and that support. But maybe for now, that's what the child needs in order to be successful in learning how to brush their teeth. So as we move through this, again, just as a reminder, Vygotsky believed that children learn first through immediate social interactions and then on an individual level as they internalize learning. So they're first going to learn by seeing, okay, by being around other people, by interacting with people, by having someone show them how to do something more difficult. And then later on, they will develop the ability to learn or accomplish something on a more individual level as they internalize that learning. So brushing teeth is a great example of that I just gave. At first, they might need that help, that reinforcement, that support, that encouragement, and then eventually you'll be able to fade it and they'll be able to do it independently. Another example of this is bathing themselves, right? In preschool, they can sometimes do it, but usually need some support. Like they might get a pile of soap on their head and then they rinse only that spot, right? Like they wash that one spot really good, but they forgot to rinse their whole selves. Or they spread the soap around, but only on their head and their face and not their whole bodies. As they internalize that learning and they see that model and they remember over time what they're supposed to do, eventually you can fade it and then they no longer need that support. So those are all examples of scaffolding. Scaffolding is a temporary support to help a child or children learn a more difficult skill than kind of where they're at currently. So there's a video in Canvas that you'll see and you can watch kind of related to Vygotsky's theory and explains it some more. And then we'll shift to Jean Piaget or Jean Piaget. His name is French, obviously, so the correct way to say it is Jean Piaget. I've heard people say Jean Piaget, all kinds of different things, but if you put the French accent on it, it's Jean Piaget. So he is considered the most influential cognitive theorist of all time. Jean Piaget really gave us almost everything we know about the way that children think, and why they think certain ways. He began his research actually by watching his own children, so he became really interested in learning about how they think and why they were doing certain things, why they had certain skills, why they performed certain ways. And so he began to map out the ways that children think and how their thoughts differ from those of older children or adults, and how their thoughts differ over time and how they grow in their ability to think cognitively. He stated and believed that intellectual skills change over time naturally through maturation. So this is somewhat related to Vygotsky's idea, right? As children grow and get older, they will become naturally able to do more things that they couldn't previously. But Jean Piaget really focused on our own internal desires and abilities, and not so much the culture around us. So cognitive equilibrium is an extremely important term for Jean Piaget. He stated that our desire to understand the world is what drives our learning. We want to achieve a sense of clarity between what we see and how we understand in our minds. And so that idea is called cognitive equilibrium. If I can see something in the world around me and I learn or figure out a way to make sense of it, I've achieved a sense of cognitive equilibrium, right? I can understand why that works or why that happens. And so he felt that that's a natural process that kind of all humans engage in. All of us have the desire to achieve that cognitive equilibrium, or that sense of understanding things in the world around us. And so that is something that is a very important term and concept to his theory. Cognitive equilibrium is linked directly to Jean Piaget. And that is, again, what he feels drives learning. Okay, so whereas Vygotsky may say that learning is driven by mentors or people around us and what they want to teach us, Piaget would say you're going to learn because you're curious and you want to know things and want to figure things out. There's a few other important terms for Jean Piaget. Schema is one of them. That is a category of knowledge, or a box of concepts is kind of another way of putting it. Soft and sour, for example, when I say those words, it means something to each of us, right? The word soft might mean something to me and might mean something totally different to you. And so those differences in our ways of thinking are called schemas, okay? And that sort of is how we've made sense of the world around us. Assimilation is the process of absorbing new information and making sense of it based on what we already know. And accommodation is the process of changing what we know and aligning it into a schema, perhaps a new one, depending, based on the information we have acquired. So my favorite example of this is with preschoolers, and you guys will see this come up again in the textbook later in the semester as we start to look at that preschool age. But a young toddler or a preschooler may go to the zoo or farm for the first time, right? And they point to an animal and say, maybe they say dog, right? It has 4 legs. They've seen a dog, so they say dog. And mom or dad or caregiver, whoever's there, says, no, that's not a dog, that's a horse, right? And the child goes, okay. So they now are assimilating information. It has 4 legs. It is way bigger though, right? And it maybe looks a little different. The nose is really long. The face looks kind of different. It has hair down the back and my dog doesn't, right? And someone just told me that it's a horse. So the word horse, I now have kind of acquired into my vocabulary and assimilated. Okay, I've assimilated that word and that knowledge. So probably next time I see that animal, I'm going to say horse. Accommodation would happen when I see a zebra, right? So now I have a schema in my mind of what a horse looks like. That zebra looks just like a horse, right? You told me if it has a nose like that and it has hair down the back and it has 4 legs, that it's a horse. But now you're telling me it's not a horse, it's a zebra. So I now have to assimilate that new information and create a new schema and accommodate that learning or that knowledge to know a zebra has black and white stripes. That's the only animal that looks like that that's going to be called a zebra, right? Horses can look a lot of different ways. Zebras can only look that way, and dogs, now I know, don't look anything like that, right? So that's really the best explanation of the difference between these 3. Assimilating and accommodation is processes that happen constantly with young children. And it's really about changing and aligning their knowledge and what the new things they're learning are into a way that they can make sense of it, okay? So Piaget has 4 stages of development, which you can see here. I'm not going to go over these now because we're going to go over them in depth throughout the semester. We'll go over each of these stages in extreme depth as we actually look at each of them according to the ages. But it's good for you to know that he does have 4 stages. Vygotsky's theory doesn't have any stages at all. Okay, so Vygotsky's theory did not actually give us developmental skills or milestones according to a specific stage like Piaget does. So the link is here and you'll see this in Canvas as well, but just know that he does have 4 stages and they're distinct as far as what the children learn and should be expected to do in those stages. There are some criticisms of Piaget's theory. So over time, as people have sort of looked at his theory and compared it to others, we have learned that, in fact, there probably were some problems with Piaget's theory, right? Which can be said probably for any theory. It's not just him. But because he's kind of our primary cognitive theorist who's given us most of what we know, we really can't, we don't have any other theory necessarily to compare it to. The focus is mostly on him because he's the one who's given us all the information we have. So he overemphasized the role of maturation and underemphasized the role of culture and interaction with others, which is basically the opposite of Vygotsky's theory. Vygotsky gave us no developmental milestones, and he talked only about culture. And Piaget really didn't talk about culture or parents at all, which is interesting considering that he started his research by looking at his own children. He really mostly only focused on maturation. As you grow, you're going to develop and get smarter and get better at things. And that's just the natural way of life and the natural process of things happening. But he really underestimated the fact that, like, if you have a parent who's extremely involved, for example, and is really pushing you to learn something, well, you might learn how to read at 3 years old, right? I knew how to read at 3 years old before I even started preschool. Does my 3-year-old know how to read? No. Does that mean he's not capable of it? No, absolutely not. Maybe, right? Maybe fully capable of it. But if it's not something that I've done or I've attempted to do with that child, then I'm not really going to actually know if they have the ability or not. So that's definitely something that Piaget kind of under-focused or underemphasized on. The other thing is that there's variations in cultures at what children can do at certain ages. And so this is not because of how smart or not a child is. It's just simply literally because of what they're exposed to. And so you're going to see a lot more of that in this week and in following weeks. He also underestimated what children are capable of given the right circumstances. So again, between him and Vygotsky, we have almost a complete theory, right? It makes sense, and we can see between the two of them everything we kind of need to about cognitive development. But standalone, they both sort of maybe have some deficiencies, okay, some areas where they're not strong. So again, just as a final comparison, Piaget believed children made discoveries and achieved learning through individual interactions with the environment around them, okay, not through people necessarily, whereas Vygotsky concentrated on the social environment and interactions with adults and peers. Piaget believed that the child is motivated and curious about the environment, which drives desire and learning regardless of other people. So you're going to be motivated and you're going to be curious no matter what, just because you're alive and you're growing and you're learning. And Vygotsky would say, no, kids really need an apprentice. They learn through people who have higher level experiences with learning and who can teach them harder things. Piaget gave us 4 stages, as I mentioned, and Vygotsky didn't believe that necessarily learning was progressive. You have to do this stage before this stage, so on and so forth, whereas Piaget did. So again, kind of just in closing, together these theories really give us a complete picture of cognitive growth. Independently, they're both maybe lacking some things that are important, but together we really get a full picture of what cognition actually looks like and how children develop cognitively over time, and they both have a lot of really great information to contribute. So I hope you enjoy this week and get a good understanding of the difference between these two theorists and what they've contributed to our knowledge that's important, and I'll see you guys next time.